Okay. All right. Can you hear me? All right. Good.
Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. We'll give it another 15 seconds and then Arlene will go ahead and get started.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Some of you might still be morning, but welcome to our session with Arlene Vassell. The title is Roots, Equity, and Liberation, Taking Action Together. Before we get started, I just have a few little housekeeping rules or notices for you all. I see you writing in the chat saying good morning and hello, and that's great that you're introducing yourselves to one another and saying hello. I want you to know that for the Q&A for Arlene Vassell specifically, you want to use the Q&A function. So that looks like the two little bubbles with another bubble within it. So if you can use the Q&A for any questions that you might have for our presenter, that would be great. That would be ideal. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I will introduce our dynamic, wonderful speaker today, Arlene Vassell, she, her, hers. She's the founding director of the Two Real Institute for Social Change. She leads a strategic direction, TISC, and supports a dynamic team of content area experts to accomplish the mission, visions, and goals. She has more than 25 years of experience working alongside and on behalf of individuals whose lives have been impacted by domestic violence, sexual abuse, and assault, stalking, homelessness, human trafficking, substance use, poverty, and other life-altering situations. So I will now turn it over to Arlene for the presentation.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining this session. I am looking forward to our hour together. And I've noticed the hour has been going by quickly. So I do want to put some disclaimers out before we jump into the topic. There's a lot of resources at the end of the presentation. I have, I think, 68 slides. You have access to the presentation so you can review the material at your leisure. I am going to cover the high points, the things that I believe are key takeaways, but I will not go through 68 slides. I'm going to leave that up to you for our time together. We'll talk about that a little bit more about what we are hoping to accomplish. But I do want you to know you have my contact information at the end. You have lots of resources at the end. I love to have conversations about roots, equity, and liberation. So feel free to reach out with any questions that you may have. If you're looking through the material and you're like, wait, I don't understand this thing, feel free to reach out. I may not respond immediately, but I promise you I will respond. So let's go into the content. All right, let's start off with something fun. What is your superpower? At the count of 3, drop it in the chat. What is your superpower? And I'll come back to it. I'm asking for a reason. Sleep. Yes, I have that one as well. So 1, 2, 3. What is your superpower? Compassion, prayer, peace, candles, communication, listening, sleep, Jesus, loyalty, healer. Oh, I love it. Have compassion, patience, bounce back. Yes. Any more? Going once, going twice, listening. All right. So, rest. Oh, that's a big one, Charlotte. Reflection. You'll need your superpower for this journey, not for the next hour, but you'll need it for the journey ahead if you're going to talk about race, equity, and liberation. So never let go of your superpower. Remember your superpower. Oftentimes we forget about our superpower. We forget about where we get our strengths from, right? And I believe mine, resilience is one for me, empathy is one. Um, Connecting with people, that seemed to be one of my superpowers that I've been told. And now I'm trying to connect with plants in the same way. So pray for me. I'm hoping to be a great super mom, plant mom. So again, hold on to your superpower because it's important. And we laugh and we find humor because that is something that we also need. But I really, really want to emphasize holding on to your superpower because I asked that question and you popped an answer really quickly, right? So that is a part of who you are. That is a part of who you are, how you show up. In many spaces, you're not able to do that, right? But you have to be intentional. I was really moved by Dr. Freeman Foster, got to pronounce her name correctly, about her going internal. My presentation is similar. It'll be focused on internal, like who do you need to become in order to do this work? So we're going to do a lot of self-reflections. I'm going to give you a lot of prompts that I hope you will revisit later. But my presentation is really about self-reflection. And I tend to say, who do you need to become in order to do this work? So hold on to that. All right. So thank you for the intro. I also want to highlight. So I also bring 25 years of doing this work in the gender based violence movement. And I've had, believe it or not, it's been 4 organizations, only four organizations, but many titles and roles and responsibilities, right? Several leadership titles, quote unquote. If you look at the title, you would assume that they were leadership positions. So I had several leadership positions. What I want to emphasize, those leadership positions did not equate to decision making power. So when we talk about leadership in this presentation, I'm also going to emphasize decision making power. Oftentimes we get titles and individuals assume that along with the titles come leadership, come decision making power. So people are expecting you to show up in a certain way when you're not able to do that. So authenticity is one thing that I'm really big on, and you'll hear more about that as I go into the roots, equity, and liberation framework that we use at the organization that I recently founded. Over the course of this journey as well, white women, they've opened doors for me. And many times I've been left to sink or swim. I'm still here, so I guess I swim well, right? I don't know how to swim, by the way. There's been a lot of harm perpetrated by um, Black and Brown people, so I'm being fully transparent. There's been harm perpetrated and caused by white people, long 25-year journey, right? And there's been a lot of repair that has happened as well. So I bring all of that into this space with me today. That's how I show up. The journey has been fruitful, rewarding, joyful, harmful, messy, complex, right? And so I'm not coming into this space to say for us to achieve collective liberation, it's an easy journey. Definitely is not. And I'll, again, drop some nuggets from the work that I've been doing. I have a quote that I have coined, I would say, and it's thriving, healing, and hurting can all happen simultaneously. So I want you to hold that as well because I don't want you to feel like as you embark on this journey after these 2 days, 3 days together, that you must be healed, there will never be hurt, and you can't thrive, right? I have proven, and several people that I know that's been on this journey as well for decades have proven that thriving, healing, and hurting can all happen simultaneously. So again, hold that. As we think about the journey ahead and as we think about lived experience and as we think about equity, the other thing that I want to pose, especially for leaders in this space, leaders by title, leaders, with decision making power, if I came into this space not with this that is the, not with the background that's being displayed on the screen, but saying that I'm the mother of two Black children. I've raised two Black children. I'm still raising them, by the way. Born in the 80s and born in the 90s. I was a teenage mother who gave birth at 18 and was denied pain medication during the drug epidemic of the 80s in New York. The doctor was fearful of giving me drugs because I may be, a candidate or someone who abused drugs, right? As a teenage, even though I was a teenage mom giving birth. I am a young person. I migrated to this country when I was a young person, leaving dear friends behind because my parents, they wanted to chase the American dream. Mind you, we had a middle class life in Jamaica. I a young person again growing up in New York. My migration journey was never acknowledged for support or identified as a strength, right? So I literally fought my way through middle school and high school, literally fighting people and systems. Coming from Jamaica, it was assumed that English was my first language. From entering the United States as a child and started navigating various systems, I learned that code switching was my way of surviving, right? So did that for a while, was past tense. As the founder of my organization now, I tend to not do that, but I do acknowledge that Black and brown people oftentimes have to do that as a survival tool. So I want to acknowledge that. From an early age, I realized that my natural hair was not welcomed in most spaces. My accent was not welcomed in most spaces. Being smart and intelligent was not welcomed in many spaces. And so, for the decision makers in this space, and for everyone else, a point of self reflection. If I share that bio versus what you see on the screen, would I be credible to talk about race and equity? I want you to hold that for a minute because a lot of times I go into spaces and I'm like, if I only shared my lived experience, would I be credible to talk about race and equity, or would you still need to see the 25 years that I have worked in this movement? So, again, throughout the presentation, I am going to drop nuggets. Well, thank you, Mariah. I am going to drop nuggets. I am going to give you points of reflection because when we talk about lived experiences, do we really create a space for individuals to lead with their lived experiences? And it's something for us to really think about as we talk about equity in the workplace. So thank you for giving me space to share my lived experience. With all that being said, I bring all of that. I bring the lessons learned, the wisdom gained from my professional and my learned experience into this space. As far as my organization, I'm going to touch on it really, really quickly. We basically, our mission is to create inclusive, equitable, and welcoming communities and work environments for all people. And our vision is to create Black-centered organizations and communities where Black people are thriving, not merely surviving. So oftentimes we're asked, well, not often, but sometimes we're asked why Black-centered. And I would say, look at the data. We got some data earlier. Look at the data about disparities that exist. And I do believe, and our organization believes, that if the most marginalized Black people are thriving, that's the key word, not merely surviving, then all of us will be thriving. This is not about oppression Olympics, because we know who benefits from oppression Olympics, right? The oppressors. This is about being explicit about what we're talking about and being focused on who we believe are the most marginalized individuals. And if we create spaces and opportunities for the most marginalized individuals to thrive, then we will all be thriving. And you have a handout that talks more about our services, so I won't go into that. And I also want to emphasize that we are not anti any other marginalized groups, right? In other spaces, we show up as aspiring allies, right? And so we just want to be clear on that. We're not anti any other marginalized groups. We know that Black people live at the intersection of many, many identities. We also believe that every community and organization have the capacity to create an environment and culture that values diverse backgrounds, perspectives, and lived experiences. And every individual have the innate ability. They have the innate ability, whether or not they choose to, that's something different, and we'll talk about that. But every individual have the innate ability to be an active participant in the necessary activities to support that philosophy. We also believe that all humans deserve to live free from violence and abuse and work in environments where they are seen, valued, heard, and respected. Therefore, we collaborate with our clients, oftentimes organizations, to disrupt and dismantle practices, procedures, and policies that perpetuate anti Blackness and other intersecting oppressions. We also believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion approaches are inadequate without the infrastructure and commitment to support and sustain thriving environments for all. I really love Dr. Stewart's talk yesterday about the necessary ingredients: vision, skills, incentives, plus resources, plus action plan equal change, right? That's really comprehensive. And oftentimes, some individuals, diversity is their focus, right? So it's more numbers. It's more a particular group of individuals. Even though you have more individuals, you increase the number, they still have no decision making power. And I'll talk more about equity as we move on, and inclusion. What does that look and feel like? Our core values, we value everything that's here. Love is at the core of everything we do. We value joy, we value pleasure, we are people centered, we are truth tellers. We value respect, collaboration, openness, honesty, humility, accountability, integrity, and vulnerability. So again, I ask for you is, what are your organizational values? What are your personal values? Are they in alignment? Right? For me, the greatest points of frustration throughout my entire professional career was being in places, in organizations where my personal value, um, where there was misalignment between my personal value and the organizational values. And I'll say the organizational values in practice, not on paper, because oftentimes organizational values on paper look good, they look great. Those are the reasons why we apply for those positions, right? But oftentimes then the misalignment is revealed in the practice. So we'll talk more about the practice, and several other presenters have also talked about the practice. So for me, if it can resonate with you, right, drop a heart if misalignment of values, personal and organizational values, equates to frustration, burnout, all the things, right? But oftentimes we don't take time. Thank you for the hearts, I see them. We don't take time to identify the misalignment. So that's one thing that it's a call to action for you. One of my colleagues, Mathina James Brightful, talks about growth work. I won't talk about homework, but one of the growth work for you is to look at your organizational values in practice and your personal values and identify areas where there's misalignment, right? Because then you need to create a plan around, what do you do with that? What do you do when your personal values are misaligned with your organizational values? Because that will ultimately impact your health and the way that you show up at work, in your community, and oftentimes, sadly, at home. So again, core values. For a time together, I am adding some more tools to your toolbox. I'm hoping to increase your curiosity. We don't have a lot of time, so I won't be able to delve deep, but I will provide lots of information. So hopefully that will increase your curiosity, and the resources that I've provided at the end will give you an opportunity to delve deeper, you know, during your at your pace. A lot of self-reflection, and I want to inspire commitment. Like what are you going to do after the summit, after my presentation? How do you take this information? How do you move awareness into action, right? And the keynote presenter talked earlier about your responsibility, and I'm also going to talk about your responsibility, but I'm going to focus a lot on who do you need to become, in order to do all of that. I am going to introduce key principles of the Roots, Equity, and Liberation framework that we've developed at my organization, and then, of course, provide tangible tools and resources for you to also embark on this journey. Um, as I mentioned before, I'm going to emphasize who do you need to become. So that's what I have planned. For you, I want you to think about, why are you here, right? And just take a minute to think about, why are you here? You don't need to share. Who do I need to become? Yes. You don't need to share. I just want you to think about, why are you here? Hopefully, I'll be able to meet your needs. That is my intention based on the description that was provided. But if for some reason you still have additional needs and you believe, Arlene has that information, I believe she has that information, she just didn't have time to touch it, feel free to reach out. And if I don't have the information, I'll work with you to find the information. So again, reflect on, why are you here? Oops, going back. All right. In addition to, why am I here to do the presentation? Why do I show up to do this work, right? I am here. I'm here to build community. I'm always showing up to build community. I'm always showing up to honor my ancestors. My dad's picture is here. He is with the ancestors. So I continue to show up to honor the ancestors and make him proud. I continue to show up for my children, right? So they can see that change is possible. My black and brown daughter, my black and brown children can see that change is possible, and it begins with them. I am here to honor the heavy, heavy Black women's shoulders that I stand on, right? So I continue to show up. So as you continue on your journey, like, why do you continue to show up? Why are you here? I'm going to give you some more prompts, right? And so lots of growth work after you attend the session and after you attend the summit overall. Your why. Again, your superpower. Now I want you to reflect on your why. Why do you really show up? Why do you continue to show up? Because you're going to need to hold on to that as well as you continue to embark on this journey. So, when we're talking about race and equity and liberation, and again, I'm going to give you nuggets throughout so that when you embark on the journey, you have these tools, right? You have to identify the purpose of your conversation. And for me, it is about heart transformation. Do we all know that our actions are a reflection of what's in our heart? I continue to say, I've said this for years. This is head and heart work, right? So, the purpose of our conversations, we always have to go back to our purpose: heart transformation, behavior change, increased awareness, and deeper understanding. I'm starting your list off, but you need to figure out, what is your why. And we're moving beyond individual racism. We're avoiding oppression Olympics. We prioritize impact over intent. We sit with discomfort. I'll talk some more about white supremacy practices that include discomfort. What do we do with that? We acknowledge people's lived experiences, so their culture, their history, their practices, their upbringing. And the previous presenter talked a lot about that as well. And then collective liberation, the goal, that's the goal, right? Because none of us are actually free until all of us are free. Thank you, Maya Angelou, for that. And so again, our goal, we want to have conversations. So again, not our time together, but for you, right? You want to lead conversations. You want to facilitate conversation that leads to something other than frustrations, right? Because it could be really frustrating to talk about race, to talk about equity, and to talk about liberation, right? So our goal should be about having fruitful and productive is the action part, productive conversations that lead to, like I had mentioned before, heart transformation, behavior changes, with which will then lead to systemic changes, and that'll lead to a culture shift, right? So that's the goal. And so we have a quote here from Rinku Sen about what do we want from our conversations. So again, a tool for you to use as you lead or as you engage in these conversations in your various organizations and communities. All right, language matters. I'm not gonna stay long with the definitions. You've received definitions earlier. Dr. Kelly provided some definitions. I received some definitions yesterday as I participated in the keynote. So you will get definitions throughout this summit. What's important is as you continue this work in your organizations and in your communities, that you have a glossary of terms. Everyone is saying the same thing. Everyone knows what you're talking about when you talk about race, when you talk about privilege, when you talk about racism, when you talk about anti Blackness. Everybody understands what you are talking about, right? So that's step one. Language matters. You need to compile a list of terminologies that will be used as you engage in this conversation. And you can co create that with staff members, with your colleagues. You can co create that in whatever community you're doing the work, but language matters. So you have some definitions here, PowerPoint. They've been compiled from various sources. You can also do your growth work to compile your definitions as well. So this is a starting point for you, all the terms that typically come up in conversations. And we have a glossary that we use at our organization. And again, it's a compilation of terms from various sources. So that's a starting point for you. I do want to stop on white supremacy, right? Because it really impacts how we show up in our day to day work. It impacts how we talk about equity, how we talk about liberation. And it is at the root of a lot of systemic oppressions that Black and Brown people experience. So, this is the belief that white people are superior to those of other races, especially the Black race, and should therefore dominate society, right? And how white supremacy shows up, I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And I shared a resource that gives you lots of information to really understand, because in order for us to dismantle oppressive systems, we have to understand what's at the root. This is not about anyone feeling bad. This is not about shame and guilt. This is about history. This is about today. This is about what is impacting the systems that we are working with. It's not about an individual, right? Even though I am going to focus on who do we need to become. We have to be better human beings in order to contribute to the collective, right? And so the self reflection is about who do I need to become in order to show up, in order to show up for the collective liberation that we are all working towards. So, white supremacy is at the root of the systemic oppression, the structural racism, the institutional racism that individuals face on a day to day basis. And I'll show you how that shows up in our workplaces shortly. And I'll also share some anecdotes, right? And so again, who do I need to be? Who do I need to become? Who do I need to be as a Black woman? Who do I need to be? Whatever identities you're showing up with, who do you need to be in order for us to dismantle these systems of oppression that are re-victimizing us, our colleagues, and the individuals that we work with? So again, some more definitions for you. And then white supremacy culture, how is it showing up? Earlier, we got a definition for culture. You have a handout that I shared as that really talks about culture, talks about white supremacy culture. Tima Okun is the author of the piece that I shared, and I've been following their work for quite a while. The first publication that they put out, I think it was 1999. There's a newer publication that I shared that gives you more information about what are we talking about, how does it show up, and I think it's like 30 pages, so it's a good read. But anyway, you have that information. So based on Tima Akun, culture reflects the beliefs, values, norms, and standards of a group, a community, a town, a state, and a nation. White supremacy culture is a widespread ideology baked into the beliefs, values, norms, and standards of our groups, our communities, our towns, our states, our nations, teaching us both overtly and covertly that whiteness holds value and whiteness is value, right? And so within our organizations, unfortunately, it's the standard, it's the norm. People come into your organizations and this is what they're given as part of orientation. Oftentimes, it's an unspoken culture, right, within the organization. So, how it shows up is with perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, quality over quantity over quality. I'll say projects over people, worship of the written word. This is the way it's been done. This is the way it's going to happen. This is how it's going to continue. The either or thinking, power hoarding, fear of conflict, right? And the purpose of white supremacy is to divide, period. And I have been studying white supremacy culture for quite a while. And I have come to the conclusion, and several other scholars have come to the conclusion, advocates as well, that white supremacy culture, the purpose of white supremacy culture is to divide, right? It's to disconnect and it is to drive fear. So we really have to uproot the white supremacy practices that are in our organizations that are causing us to divide our organizations and people cannot thrive. Again, I just want to highlight that individuals that you're working with, young people, adults, um, they come to us and they live at the intersection of various identities, and we have to be informed about that. And that's where cultural humility come in. We will never learn. We will never arrive. We will never arrive where we will be informed about every person's culture, every person's identity, but we need to have conversations about that, about how people identify. We need to talk to people about their cultural beliefs, their cultural values, and the things that are sources of strength for them, for their community, and how do we integrate that into our work. And when we talk about equity and when we talk about liberation, it's really important that we acknowledge, right? Acknowledge that and understand the intersections and be able to integrate our knowledge and our understanding into our practices and policies. And it takes work. It has to be intentional. It will not just happen. And I noticed throughout the summit, there's a lot of presenters who are touching on how to integrate your understanding about the intersections into your trauma response. Some additional terms around racial justice. What is racial justice? Because the word is used and oftentimes it's misused, right, and misinterpreted. So I've given you a definition of what racial justice is. What is the goal? It includes naming, resisting, and replacing systems. So it's naming, resisting, and replacing systems of white supremacy, anti Blackness, and systems that cause harm to Black and Brown people. Another definition around for justice, and we really have to pay attention to how we define justice. We need to lean into restorative approaches that focus on healing and wellness and not only focus on the legal system's definition. So again, This is to increase your curiosity, for you to do additional growth work, so additional work on your own as you move into as you continue to embark on this journey of equity. Emotional tax, it is labor intensive for Black and brown people to do this work on a daily basis, and so we integrate wellness and we integrate well-being and self-care, which I'll talk about later. But it's important that you acknowledge that the individuals that you're working with, the individuals that show up for services, it's emotional, it's so much labor to just show up as a Black and brown person in your workplace, in your community, right? And so we need to acknowledge that the emotional tax has really shortened the lives, literally, of Black and brown people, right? And so how do you show up as an ally? How do you support your colleagues? How do you acknowledge um, that people are showing up for services and they have all these other issues and all these other systems that they are fighting against, right? How does that impact how you show up? What are your biases that may play a part in how you're responding, right? So the self-reflection piece, again, to examine your personal biases. And if you want to be anti-racist, what does that mean, right? It just means that you're continuing to identify and challenge the values, the structures, the behaviors that perpetuate systemic racism. It's an ongoing process. Allyship, here's a definition. It's not a one off, it's an ongoing journey. I often say that there are individuals, white women, that I define as allies, but another Black person may not, right? And so allyship is is person to person. You have to show up for everyone, right? So if you're showing up for me, you can't cause harm to another Black woman and say you're an ally, right? So how are you showing up on a consistent basis? I am aspiring to be an ally for other marginalized communities, right? That I don't self-identify with those communities. So it's an ongoing, I get called in all the time, I get called out, and it's okay. I have to also do my work as I want to show up as an ally for other communities, other marginalized communities. So it's not a one off. You don't get to check a box and say, I was an ally last week, I was an ally this morning, and so that carries me for the rest of my life. Nope, it's an ongoing journey. And then another definition around racial equity, what is it? And it's about applying justice. So oftentimes racial equity and racial justice, they're used interchangeably. They're related, but they're cousins, but they're distinct definitions. So I provided those for you. And then here we go. It's like, who do you need to be? Angela Davis told us in a racist society, it's not enough to be non racist. We must be anti racist. So, what does that mean? What does that mean for you? Who do you need to be? Who do you need to become in order to join this journey in a meaningful way? And so you will have another personal reflection, right? For you to think about the part of my identity that I'm most aware of on a daily basis. And the part of my identity that I feel gives me the most privilege is. And how can you do that? How can you do that? How can you use those parts of your identity that gives you the most privilege to co create equitable and welcoming environments for all? So, again, lots of personal reflection, lots of growth work. And so, the next 3 or 4 slides, they'll provide antidotes to white supremacy practices, right? And how you can implement, what can you do within your organization in order to dismantle white supremacy culture within your organization. So each one has a specific antidote, and it has specific things that you can do in your organization. Again, I want to remind you, it's not a one off, it will not happen overnight. It's a process. You have to plan, you have to be intentional, right? And increased awareness, increased knowledge is the first step. And then, of course, the glossary of terms. So everyone knows what you're talking about. An activity that can be helpful in your organization once you review the handout that I shared is you can identify in your organization, well, how are these showing up on a day-to-day? Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, yes, this is showing up. This is showing up within our organization. So you can have a conversation amongst yourself in your organization about how are these practices showing up in your organization. And then you can look at the antidotes and be strategic with creating a racial equity action plan. So again, here's some additional antidotes that you will have and you'll have access to. And again, I suggest once you read the handout about how these show up, if you're not familiar with the terminology and with the white supremacy practices, white supremacy culture, if you're not familiar, just learn more about it and then talk about how it's showing up and then talk about the antidotes. It should be there. If it's not there, I'll figure out how to add it, Veronica. Thank you for pointing that out. I added it to the list of resources. But again, I'll check and then I'll go back and add it if it's not there. Thanks for letting me know. Again, additional antidotes. All right. And then, so as we think about creating a safe and racially equitable community, what does that look and feel like to you? When you think about a safe and racially equitable community, what does that look like? What does that feel like to you? You could just take a moment to just think about it. Again, you don't have to share, right? Um, you could just make a note. Belonging, peace. Thank you. Yes. Yes, belonging and peace. I love it. Yeah. Peace, joy. I think about joy. I think about everyone's thriving, right? Oh, thank you, Lydia. Oh, I would love to hear more about that. Belonging is coming up again, acceptance, safety, success. I would even say, think about a time where you felt a deep sense of belonging, right? Safety, success. Yes, yes, yes. Future goals. Yes, yes, yes. Love, peace, security, appreciated. Yes, yes. Intentional programs centering marginalized groups. Yes, yes. All of it. All of it. All of it. All of it. You all get it, right? You all get it. It's just that we need to make time to implement what we know to be true and to address the barriers that prevent us from getting there, right? Yes. So that's the goal. That's the goal, is to eliminating barriers. And sometimes we have to break it all down and rebuild it, right? It all depends on your organizational culture and commitment. I wanted to introduce this slide that demonstrates the equality, equity, and reality. Um, Dr. Kelly shared the justice tree earlier, right? And so this is another version of a visual that you can use. Um, a variety have been created over the years by the Center for Story-Based Strategy and the Interaction Institute for social change, right? And so the reality, well, we know what equality looks like, right? We talked about that in other sessions. The assumption that everyone benefits from the same support, which we know that's not true. And then equity, everyone's getting the support that they need. The reality here, again, some people they get more and others get less, and the disparity is huge, right? So the goal really is to just remove the fence. Let's just remove the fence. Let's just take away the barrier, right? And then everyone will be able to see the game, right? So that's the goal. When I use that visual, that's what I talk about. The goal is to just remove the barrier. And then the inequity will be removed. And then the systemic barriers. What are the systemic barriers, the gates that's preventing everyone from thriving. So let's just remove the gate. And so again, we're moving from what do we need to do? We can talk about that. We must talk about that. But we also have to talk about who do we need to be in order to bring forth the transformation that we seek. So reclaiming your identity, first thing. And you are a leader. We're all leaders, right? Regardless of your role. Yes, removing the fence. Regardless of your role, you are a leader, you have influence and you have power. So you have to identify, you have to go back to where reclaim your identity. Where do you have power? Where do you have influence in your organization and in your community? So some prompts to help you do that. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? Again, growth work. What is the story of all your people? Who are your people? What is the past? What is the present and the future story of your people? So you have to go back to reclaiming your identity, learning about the history of the United States, the history of slavery in the United States, right? And so lots of self. But it's important because if I'm not well, right? If I can't show up as my whole self, I really cannot show up for the collective, right? So I'm emphasizing the self awareness. Who am I? Who do I need to become? The self acceptance, accepting who you are, all of you, right? And why am I talking about this when we talk about roots, equity, and liberation and talk about doing the work of racial justice and racial equity? You have to know who you are in order to show up for anybody else, right? Self perception. It's important. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next page. Self discovery, discovering your potential, your history, your true identity, self actualization. Do you feel like you can reach your full potential? All of this contributes to positive racial identity. It contributes to cultural pride. It contributes to self confidence. It contributes to a sense of belonging, self esteem, inner peace, all of what we need for this journey. Without all of this, we fall victim oftentimes to false truths. Let me give that to you one more time. False truths. And that's how we show up. That's how we respond. That's how we engage, right? Because we have not fully developed a true understanding of who we are at the core, right? So, self perception is a huge one. How we see ourselves matter. How we see ourselves in our heads really inform how we show up, right? The judgments that we make about ourselves, our internal messaging. As Black and Brown people, if we had time, we would talk about internalized oppression, right? I would suggest, again, for growth work, to do some digging about that if you're not familiar with that term, internalized oppression, right? Negative self perception can lead to a distorted self image and really impacts how we show up at work and in our communities. It influences our self esteem, it influences our decision making, right? And so, again, it's important. The self perception, self awareness, self reflection. Bell Hooks told us, right? The enemy within must be transformed before we can confront the enemy outside. And I truly believe that. Truly believe that. So, building a race equity culture, what are we talking about? Much of the points we touched on already. So, you need to establish a shared vocabulary, identify race equity champions at the board and senior leadership level, name race equity work as a strategic imperative for your organization, and have continuous dialogue about race equity. It's a continuous journey. You will never, ever arrive, okay? Never, I promise you, never. It's a continuous journey. And for us, when we talk about roots, equity, and liberation, that's what it's about when we do our work. We have a tree, a blank tree, that we talk about the roots within an organization. We talk about what support is needed in order for us to get to the point where everybody within the organization is thriving, right? And so that's an assessment that you can also do within your organization. Who's thriving? who's merely surviving, and who is leaving. Who is thriving, who is surviving, merely surviving, and who continues to leave, right? So that's another yes, I see you, Randy. Thank you. That's a strategy that you could use within your organization. So, as far as the 4 A's that we use at the Turrell Institute, we focus on attitude. That means your attitude, your individual attitude, your collective as an organization, collective biases, individual biases. So, attitude, it informs your action. Assurance is building trust. You have to build trust, right? Within your organization, internal and external. Access, who has access to information, who has access to resources, and then accountability. What is it and what is it not? Right? And who are you really accountable to? And we're not talking about punishment, right? We're talking about calling people in and calling people out and holding people responsible for the commitment that your organization has decided to embark on. So, attitude, internal and community, and within your organization, various individual attitudes, and collective attitudes towards racism, towards equity, and towards liberation. And assurance, we use assurance because you're building trust. It's an ongoing process, right? Again, under attitude, we want to focus on authentic leadership. For leaders in this space, you're leading with your heart. You're leading with purpose. You are leading with alignment of values and collaboration. So, again, like I talked about, the individual and the collective work is learning about the history, the context of structural racism in the United States. Reflect on your role in perpetuating structural racism. Where do you stand? How do you, oftentimes I'll say, the master doesn't even need to be present for the master's tool to be used because it's so ingrained in our culture, right? So reflect on your role in how you are perpetuating intentionally or unintentionally, right? Educate your board, community partners, funders, and then, of course, identifying and addressing inequitable and unfair practices and policies within your organization. Some more readiness assessment. What do you need? What's the organizational culture? So these are the things that we dive deeper into. We help you to create a personal growth plan and an organizational culture shift plan, not a strategic plan, but a culture shift plan. And then, of course, collaborative leadership. Another quote. I'm a quote person. I'll just keep going with the quotes. And then one of the big things that you have to do is decenter whiteness. That is not the norm, right? Everybody's lived experiences and voices are valuable and should be respected. And we just have to recreate a thing, right? Because oftentimes we inherit a thing, right? And it's just left unexamined because that's the norm. That's how we do things. But I encourage you. I encourage you to revisit your policies and the practices, and what are the values and the cultures, and what are they connected to in your organization. So again, some additional strategies for analyzing your work through a racial equity lens. Mindset and culture shift is a reminder. I talked about it already. It's heart transformation. It is behavior changes, and you're working towards a culture shift. You're not working to increase numbers only. Let me emphasize that. You're not only working to increase the number of Black and Brown people who are visible and representing your organization, right? We're talking about decision making power. We're talking about collaboration across the organization. We're talking about a culture shift around equity, right? Somebody comes into your organization, they immediately feel a sense of belonging. They immediately feel like, oh, this is a welcoming and equitable environment. So it's an immediate. Power and influence, just some prompts of where do you have power and influence. Resonance Network, I just shared that as a resource for you. You could delve deeper into that resource. And then collective liberation. What is your goal? What are you working towards? It's important for you to define collective liberation. Um, Actually, I mentioned it earlier. My goal, I do believe that none of us will be free until all of us are free. So that's the words that I use, thanks to Maya Angelou. So when we talk about collective liberation, if you don't know what your goal is, you don't know where you're headed. And we don't talk about that. What does collective liberation look like for you in your organization? And this is a conversation, again, that you should have across staff. Again, I mentioned this before. Who do you need to be? Who do you need to become? What resources do you need? Shared learning experience. I didn't share this in the beginning because I'm sharing this for you. It's 3 slides. I am suggesting that as you're creating a learning community, that you use these guidelines in the beginning. I think for the summit and in the session, we talked about some guidelines. So I offered some guidelines for you as you embark on this conversation. Challenge you to ask your colleagues, why are you resistant? What is causing the most resistance for you? Brandy, do I have questions? Because then I have a couple slides that I want to finish, but I do want to give a couple minutes for questions.
Nothing in the Q&A as of now.
Perfect. Okay. So why are you resistant, right? So you're asking your colleagues or you yourself to reflect on why are you resistant. Self-care, healing, and wellness. We prioritize that. We have our framework is 6 phases, and self-care, healing, and wellness is throughout. I'm offering the definition because they're used interchangeably sometimes, and they're distinct things and activities, right? And this I offered in the handout. It's a healing and accountability wheel provided by the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. Very informative tool for you to use. Each section has 2 sections, right? And it talks about what does healing and accountability look like. So again, a lot of resources that I mentioned that I shared, just to give you some additional information, increase your curiosity. These are the principles that we integrate in our framework that I wanted to share, but I wanted you to also have additional information about specific topics. Self-care, when you think about self-care, you need to understand the role of oppression plays in individuals' ability and inability to achieve wellness, right? You can offer a thing, but if everyone doesn't have access to the thing, it's not helpful. So pay attention to that. My reflection on what I believe self care is: action plan, helpful resources, lots of books, listserv, magazine subscription that'll give you lots of information. Great books that were read by allies that I believe are allies, and they deemed them to be helpful. Books recommended by Black and Brown people that are in my circle. So I wanted to share those with you. And then you have this handout around what is an actor, what is an ally, and an accomplice. You have that information. Again, a handout. If you don't have it, just let me know and I'll share it. And then a final quote: this moment in time calls upon us to purposefully restore humanity for all. When we work together, care for ourselves and each other, stay connected to our core values. Again, your core values and your superpower that guides us, social transformation is possible. And here's my contact information. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out via email. Feel free to learn more about our organization and continue reflecting on who do I need to become for this journey ahead. Brandy, back to you.
Thank you, Arlene. That was an excellent presentation. Lots of hearts and thumbs ups, and thank yous in the
thank,
chat.
thank you.
So we have a couple of minutes. If there are any questions that you have for Arlene at this moment in time, please feel free to write them in the Q&A section of the platform, and I'll also check the chats just to see. So
Okay.
far, no additional questions. I'll give it another few moments as you all think about that, but just wanted to let you know that this recording will be made available with your additional resources from the summit. So if there was a slide that you wanted to review a little further, you'll be able to have that opportunity. And also, I still see no questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, but just wanted to remind you that our next session will be Linda Ammer, and they will illuminate the intersection of early childhood education and gender identity, drawing from their book, Rainbow Parenting. Lynn will share insights on fostering affirming environments for LGBTQ plus youth, highlighting life-saving impact of acceptance. So that session will be our next session after the break. Still seeing, okay, I see in the Q&A question, if you have a minute, can you talk more about uprooting? And we are at the end of time, so if we could give it maybe a minute or so.
Okay, so oftentimes, so uprooting, it takes collaborating and conversations with leadership within your organization, and it takes co-creating a something new. It takes co-creating something new by addressing what are the root causes of inequities and oppression within your system, within your organization, right? And so once you identify those root causes, then it's a strategic plan. And that's what we call a culture shift plan. Then you have to develop concrete strategies, activities, and outcomes to how do you then dismantle, AKA uproot, the root causes of what's happening within your organization. And then we plant new seeds, and then a new tree, like Gia had showed us, a justice tree. A new tree then comes to life.
Thank you, Arlene.
You're welcome.
I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box, and we are at time, a little bit over. Thank you, Arlene, for your presentation. And again, this is her contact information if you would like to reach out to her and have discuss further how you can liberate your communities and build equity in your work. Then yes, please reach out to her.
Please do. All right. Thank you, Brandy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Arlene.
All right. Bye bye.
Take care, everyone.